The raid took place in a tense atmosphere, where every movement was calculated to approach the target without creating any vulnerability for error. Federal forces deployed a three-tier formation, ensuring the front, back, and sides of the house were locked down. When the signal to move was transmitted, the technical team approached the main door, using specialized breaching equipment to gain entry in a single, fluid motion. The door collapsed, and the entire house was immediately brought under control using a sectoring tactic, where each squad was responsible for securing fixed points. The house belonged to a judge familiar with the U.S. legal system, a man who had signed hundreds of arrest warrants and approved countless drug cases. But that veneer of respectability began to crack the moment the ground floor rooms were checked. A wall showed a slight fracture at a point not part of the original structure. After only a few confirmation checks, the investigative team discovered a false wall deliberately erected to conceal evidence. When the wall panel was removed, the sealed space behind it was revealed to be a stash house. Packages of powdered substances were stacked in blocks, each block bearing the markings of a smuggling ring operating from South America into the United States, all wrapped for moisture resistance and arranged for long-term storage. Yet the packages of illicit substances were only the beginning of the truth. A safe was placed deep inside, containing carefully sealed stacks of cash, the total value of which far exceeded the legitimate income of a judicial official. Serial numbers on the bundles of money indicated the funds came from numerous small transactions, consolidated through informal financial kiosks to evade the bank control system. Every detail pointed to a dense network that couldn't have formed solely from the outside without intervention from an internal link. The basement of the house exposed the deeper scale of this operation. Weapons were organized into functional groups, from personal firearms to heavy assault gear. The quantity was inconsistent with any civilian self-defense need, clearly reflecting the objective of supporting transportation routes that required a layer of protection against surveillance. The fact that a judge possessed such an arsenal indicated a level of professional ethical deviation that went far beyond the typical abuses of power reported in previous investigations. However, the key point wasn't the weapons or the drugs. The homeowner's personal cell phone unlocked revealed the core link that changed the entire nature of the case. It contained encrypted exchanges with a high-level figure in a Venezuelan drug trafficking ring, notorious for controlling the largest cross-border shipping route in the South American region. The content of the messages was not one of threat or coercion, but of coordinating instructions, adjusting transportation schedules, creating legal loopholes in court proceedings, and suggesting favorable times for cargo to pass through heavily policed areas. Those encrypted segments were translated and analyzed on site, showing a consistent, long-term collaboration. This was not behavior forced by a criminal organization. This was active cooperation, where a person holding a position of trust within the U.S. legal system was directly facilitating the flow of contraband. This overturned all initial assumptions, forcing federal forces to activate the procedure for expanding the file from a case of individual corruption to a systemic infiltration threat. As the investigative teams continued to sweep through devices and documents, each new discovery made the picture clearer. A judge was not just aiding a drug ring, but acting as a coordination point. This behavior not only threatened the local community but also created an interstate trafficking corridor, putting the justice system in a position of being manipulated from within. And from this point, the next steps of the investigation would expand in a direction no longer confined to a quiet suburban house, but leading straight into the structure of an unimaginably deep conspiracy. As investigative teams shifted from the scene to data analysis, what was hidden beneath Marcus Hale's professional facade began to emerge with undeniable clarity. Federal financial experts focused on the transaction chain linked to him, and in the first round of analysis, anomalies appeared. Regular money transfers between a series of companies with no personnel, no physical offices, and no substantive tax reporting. Each company operated as a static shell, existing only to obscure the trail of funds. Financial statements were traced back 6 years, with the total exceeding $41 million. Money was funneled in through consulting fees from businesses operating outside U.S. territory, then transferred through entities registered in Delaware, Panama, and Curacao. Finally, the capital flowed back into the U.S. as investment profits and service payments, becoming fully legalized when it appeared in Judge Hale's personal accounts. This was a cyclical money laundering structure, designed not to leave the typical accounting footprint of a criminal organization, but to look like the legitimate investment activities of a high net worth individual. In the process of dissecting the transactions, Investigators found that payment chains matched the periods when major drug cases in the southeastern U.S. were stalled in an unusual way. Some involved requests for judicial delays, others were motions to reduce traffic infrastructure checks, all occurring during the phase when funds poured into Hale-linked accounts. This created a clear pattern linking financial gain to the ability to manipulate legal proceedings. A text message extracted from his phone became a turning point. Run 38 loads this quarter. Same route, no roadside interference. Translated, this message indicated a large-scale transportation plan entrusted to an individual who not only held court authority but also had the ability to influence force allocation on key routes. 38 trips, each carrying between 50 and 120 pounds of prohibited substances, meant almost a ton of heroin and fentanyl were circulated in a short period. This was no longer just aiding, this was coordination. Analyzing Hale's appointment calendar, specialists noted that meetings were encrypted as regular social activities, golf, lunch, review. However, cross-reference with banking data, these meetings coincided with money transfers to several officials in neighboring counties. Among them were 12 county-level officials and 3 law enforcement officers. These individuals had participated in decisions directly affecting the movement of trucks, the scheduling of warehouse inspections, and the priority level of transportation-related cases. The total amount of bribery was determined to be $8.3 million. In previous money laundering cases, a high-ranking public servant accepting bribes was not uncommon. But the difference in this case was the proactivity. Messages sent from Hale did not contain defensive or evasive content, but detailed instructions on how to clear a path, delay checks, or remove legal pressure from certain front companies used for shipping. He wasn't pulled into the network, he built a part of it. Digital forensics also uncovered a series of real-time encrypted timestamp notes, stored in a secure application. The notes contain brief information on prioritizing court hearing schedules, postponing sentencing, and extending the document processing timeline to create suitable windows for subsequent shipments. This structure reflected a degree of direct intervention in the legal process, a level rarely achieved even by major criminal organizations in the United States. From financial data to personal schedules, from encrypted messages to the network of relationships, the entire picture was clear. The legal system was not just breached, but partially restructured to serve the interests of a transnational cartel. These findings forced the federal agency to transition from an investigative status to a counter-infiltration status, preparing for a campaign much larger in scale than initially anticipated. Once the key facts in the Judge Hale case were established, federal agencies immediately moved from the collection phase to the neutralization phase. The focus was no longer on proving criminal behavior, but on cutting off the drug trafficking route that Hale had facilitated for years. Files from the Analysts team indicated an operational network stretching across multiple states, with transit points, temporary storage warehouses, and cargo processing facilities operating under the guise of legitimate businesses. The existence of this chain created a widespread risk, forcing officials to launch a synchronized operation to control and dismantle each operational segment. The operation was codenamed Operation Crosscut, implying the severing of a main artery that the cartel had quietly established within U.S. territory. The first decision was to adopt simultaneous action, preventing any single link from being alerted. FBI, ICE, the E units, and local task forces were assigned duties by region, with the tactical map divided into 7 key points across Georgia, Florida, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Illinois, and Alabama. Each point was identified as part of the shipping chain: container receiving points, separation points, cargo fortification points, final transshipment points, and temporary concealment facilities. In the riverside area of Savannah, a series of old warehouses nestled among low-traffic routes. Here, containers from South America via Puerto Cabello port were brought in. Though outwardly unremarkable, thermal imaging showed traces of chemicals clinging to the floor and walls. When the tactical team approached and opened a side door, a full complement of industrial packaging equipment was revealed. Empty containers, plastic pallets, and stacks of packaging waiting to be used indicated the site was used for unboxing, portioning, and repackaging for distribution along domestic routes. Some subjects attempted to escape through the dock area, but the closed perimeter sealed off all efforts within minutes. In Houston, a small industrial office was used as a conversion facility. Federal forces discovered numerous chemical barrels containing precursor ingredients used in the manufacture of illicit substances, Some individuals present in the area attempted to flee via a side exit, but the K-9 unit's control immediately blocked this path. Barrels in the back room still bore powder residue, a sign of separation mixing and bulking activity to increase the quantity of the cargo. This was the link that allowed the ring to increase profits before transporting the goods to northeastern states. The most intense confrontation occurred in New Jersey, where a cargo distribution center was utilized as a point for legalizing drug shipments. Outside, standard logistics vehicles were lined up, but inside was a transaction area for the cartel's brokers. When federal forces deployed their assault formation, multiple subjects fled through the rows of closely parked trucks. Pursuit teams had to navigate the narrow lanes between containers, where subjects attempted to hide or lock container doors to delay pursuit. The use of quick thermal scanning equipment helped locate subjects hiding in refrigerated compartments, allowing forces to immediately neutralize the resistance point. When the target points were secured, the volume of seized evidence reflected an operational scale far exceeding initial predictions. Over 1.8 tons of illicit substances, including heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine derivatives, hundreds of firearms with serial numbers removed, along with cash, gold, and securities valued at over $140 million. But the particularly noteworthy part lay in the records related to regular payments to individuals identified as county or city officials. A cabinet in the Newark office contained a ledger of monthly payments, with clear written notes showing coordination with Judge Hale. Hale guarantees clearance. Do not deviate. This data point forced investigators to expand the scope from a transportation ring to an issue of penetration and manipulation of government structures. The operation, which began as a single raid, became the start of dismantling a deep-rooted network where judicial power and criminal organization intersected, creating a long undetected operational path. Operation Crosscut was not just an intercept, it was an opening phase, moving toward the complete eradication of a structure that had been operating smoothly for years. Once the key facts in the Judge Hale case were established, federal agencies immediately moved from the collection phase to the neutralization phase. The focus was no longer on proving criminal behavior, but on cutting off the drug trafficking route that Hale had facilitated for years. Files from the Analysts team indicated an operational network stretching across multiple states, with transit points, temporary storage warehouses, and cargo processing facilities operating under the guise of legitimate businesses. The existence of this chain created a widespread risk, forcing officials to launch a synchronized operation to control and dismantle each operational segment. The operation was codenamed Operation Crosscut, implying the severing of a main artery that the cartel had quietly established within U.S. territory. The first decision was to adopt simultaneous action, preventing any single link from being alerted. FBI, ICE, DE units, and local task forces were assigned duties by region, with the tactical map divided into 7 key points across Georgia, Florida, Texas, New Jersey, New York, Illinois, and Alabama. Each point was identified as part of the shipping chain: container receiving points, separation points, cargo fortification points, final transshipment points, and temporary concealment facilities. In the riverside area of Savannah, a series of old warehouses nestled among low-traffic routes. Here, containers from South America via Puerto Cabello port were brought in, though outwardly unremarkable. Thermal imaging showed traces of chemicals clinging to the floor and walls. When the tactical team approached and opened a side door, a full complement of industrial packaging equipment was revealed. Empty containers, plastic pallets, and stacks of packaging waiting to be used indicated the site was used for unboxing, portioning, and repackaging for distribution along domestic routes. Some subjects attempted to escape through the dock area, but the closed perimeter sealed off all efforts within minutes. In Houston, a small industrial office was used as a conversion facility. Federal forces discovered numerous chemical barrels containing precursor ingredients used in the manufacture of illicit substances. Some individuals present in the area attempted to flee via a side exit, but the K-9 unit's control immediately blocked this path. Barrels in the back room still bore powder residue, a sign of separation mixing and bulking activity to increase the quantity of the cargo. This was the link that allowed the ring to increase profits before transporting the goods to northeastern states. The most intense confrontation occurred in New Jersey, where a cargo distribution center was utilized as a point for legalizing drug shipments. Outside, standard logistics vehicles were lined up, but inside was a transaction area for the cartel's brokers. When federal forces deployed their assault formation, multiple subjects fled through the rows of closely parked trucks. Pursuit teams had to navigate the narrow lanes between containers, where subjects attempted to hide or lock container doors to delay pursuit. The use of quick thermal scanning equipment helped locate subjects hiding in refrigerated compartments, allowing forces to immediately neutralize the resistance point. When the target points were secured, the volume of seized evidence reflected an operational scale far exceeding initial predictions. Over 1.8 tons of illicit substances, including heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine derivatives. Hundreds of firearms with serial numbers removed, along with cash, gold, and securities valued at over $140 million. But the particularly noteworthy part lay in the records related to regular payments to individuals identified as county or city officials. A cabinet in the Newark office contained a ledger of monthly payments, with clear written notes showing coordination with Judge Hale. Hale guarantees clearance. Do not deviate. This data point forced investigators to expand the scope from a transportation ring to an issue of penetration and manipulation of government structures. The operation, which began as a single raid, became the start of dismantling a deep-rooted network where judicial power and criminal organization intersected, creating a long undetected operational path. Operation Crosscut was not just an intercept, it was an opening phase, moving toward the complete eradication of a structure that had been operating smoothly for years. As Operation Crosscut completed its phase of simultaneous raids and arrests, the focus shifted to the in-depth analysis of all evidence secured. Field reports were only the tip of the iceberg. Financial data, internal documents, and encrypted logs revealed the true nature of the network. Federal officials now established an undeniable conclusion. The case was not a solitary act by Judge Marcus Hale, but a deliberate operational structure where multiple individuals within the public system played roles in facilitating, shielding, and supporting the cartel's transportation routes. In the investigative office, the network diagram expanded daily. From the opaque payments, investigators tracked each link. A deputy sheriff in Fulton County received money under the guise of security consulting. A planning commissioner in Jacksonville approved warehouse space precisely at the time large shipments from South America needed to be legalized. A logistics supervisor in Chicago pushed for unusually quick cargo inspection files, coinciding with the cartel broker's delivery schedules. These activities did not create a formal uproar, but each action contributed to smoothly clearing the way for the transport line. During data cross-referencing, a stream of internal emails and encrypted notes continued to surface. Some text messages from the phones of those involved contained brief phrases. Delay 24 hours. Clear lane. Hold file. These instructions provided no explicit detail, but when placed alongside the shipping map, every word indicated direct coordination between individuals holding administrative control and the cartel's intermediaries. The efficiency of these maneuvers was clearly visible in the cargo moving across multiple states without encountering random inspections or interdiction orders, something common for suspicious shipping routes. The total determined amount of bribery paid to the public official network reached $8.3 million over 5 years. What was notable was that the money did not arrive in large lumps, but was broken down, routed through shell company accounts, or recorded as normal service expenditures. This was a tactic that prevented financial statements from showing clear anomalies, yet created a stable cash flow that helped the cartel maintain long-term influence across multiple levels of management. Furthermore, court records were also manipulated. Several cases related to cargo transport that should have been scrutinized were delayed or transferred to a lower court level under the reason of missing documentation. Other cases were classified as low priority, which dragged out the investigation time, creating sufficient gaps for subsequent shipments to pass through successfully. This coordination was not coincidental. It demonstrated a systematic level of intervention, where administrative positions played a crucial role. When the information became public, the public reaction was distinctly two-sided. At administrative buildings, citizens carried banners demanding transparency, accountability, and the firing of all involved individuals. Many expressed anger that the very people tasked with protecting social order had become facilitators for the poison entering their communities. Conversely, another segment was shocked and confused, unable to believe that figures they had once trusted could be involved in organized crime on such a massive scale. Within the local government system, the reaction was equally chaotic. Some agencies held prolonged closed-door meetings to try to stabilize the situation and prevent the crisis from spreading. Certain leaders rushed to issue statements aiming to distance themselves from the case. In New Jersey, the police union representative issued a release asserting they did not condone the illegal acts of any officer. Meanwhile, some officials accused federal agencies of overreach, creating a misleading image of local government. This very contradiction heightened the tension in the atmosphere. While public opinion remained polarized, federal investigators continued to expand the connection diagram, step by step exposing the depth of a network structure that had operated quietly for years. And at the center of that diagram, unchanged, was still Judge Marcus Hale, the man who had used legal power to transform invisible routes into an operational corridor right within the heart of the government apparatus. Starting from a single initial raid, the case had transformed into a comprehensive excavation of the cartel's level of penetration into the very system that should have been on the front lines against them. After Operation Crosscut completed the containment and arrest phase, specialized teams entered the process of wide-ranging consequence management. Documents recovered from the 7 raid locations provided a comprehensive view of how the network operated, but also posed a new challenge. A significant portion of the public system had been co-opted to serve the interstate drug trafficking route. This forced federal agencies to broaden the scope of their assessment, focusing not only on the personnel arrested but also reviewing the entire mechanisms they once controlled. In Washington, analysis teams noted a volume of files needing cross-referencing that exceeded initial projections. Documents related to internal meetings, brief memos, records of unusual approvals, small budget expenditures that coincided with shipping schedules, all were reorganized to reconstruct the actions of each individual within the system. In this process, 3 patterns of deviation were clearly identified: unusual paperwork prioritization, relaxed warehouse control, and delayed transportation inspections. These patterns appeared across multiple counties, indicating that the manipulation was not limited to one position but spread horizontally across the administrative apparatus. In Georgia, where the case originated, a review of local agencies showed many departments had operated in a state of silent dependence. Employees in some units admitted they had received directives to limit surprise inspections or prioritize certain groups of transportation businesses, but were unaware they were links in a criminal ring. This indicated a level of manipulation so sophisticated that those within the system self-adjusted their behavior according to instructions without understanding the true nature. In Florida, riverside warehouses that had been permitted during the period coinciding with the start of shipments from South America began to be reviewed. Licensing data showed administrative intervention to speed up the approval process, allowing these warehouses to operate without deep scrutiny. Many permits were signed through fast-track review, not requiring security reinspection despite the facilities being near sensitive transport routes. When cross-referenced with seized documents, this pattern matched the large consignments the cartel routed domestically. In Texas and Illinois, temporary storage facilities used to adjust cargo volume also fell into a similar situation. Several shell companies registered under individuals linked to Hale were found to have operated for long periods without routine inspections. The cash flow of these companies was stable, fully consistent with normal business operations, but when cross-referenced with the transportation system, they served as transshipment and origin masking points for the cargo. Government agencies in the 2 states were compelled to organize internal audits. Some departments were forced to temporarily cease operations to review files, leading to the stagnation of many administrative hearings and workflow processes. This situation spread to New Jersey and New York, where personnel directly involved in transportation permits and storage approvals were implicated. Local governments were forced to call closed-door meetings to assess the damage and plan the restoration of public trust. As the information spread, American society witnessed a prolonged reaction. Many urban areas held community forums where citizens questioned the accountability of public agencies. Statements at these forums reflected deep frustration. People were not only concerned that drugs had penetrated their neighborhoods but were skeptical of the legal system's ability to self-police. Many who had relied on legislative and judicial bodies for safety now faced the reality that those with responsibility to protect them were acting as facilitators. However, in many meetings, some groups also acknowledged that the federal crackdown had opened an opportunity to repair the organization's corrupted structure. Dismantling each link helped local agencies reevaluate their operational methods and forced them to reset control procedures, enhance internal oversight, and apply independent mechanisms for reviewing high-impact decisions. This created a new shift from initial confusion to a process of rebuilding. In internal reports, a prominent conclusion was recorded. The case not only demonstrated the extent of criminal penetration into the system but also highlighted the fragility of governance mechanisms when influenced by financial interests. This very conclusion became the basis for federal agencies to move to the next phase, where legal prosecution was only a part, and the restoration of the operational structure was the core mission to prevent future re-infiltration. As analysis teams finalized the document classification, the full scope of the case emerged with a level of detail that forced federal units to adjust their approach. This was no longer a simple drug operation. The aggregated numbers reflected an operational apparatus with a deeper level of government intervention than any similar case in recent decades. Every seized package of illicit substances, every money transfer, every piece of recovered weaponry became part of a structure proving the system had been deliberately exploited over a long period. The consolidated report from the raids indicated a massive amount of evidence. Over 1.8 tons of heroin, fentanyl, and methamphetamine derivatives seized. This volume was enough to sustain the supply for multiple metropolitan areas for months, if not interdicted. Alongside this was financial assets totaling $144 million, including cash, gold bars, bank accounts, bonds, and convertible securities. These were found in safes, in shell company accounts, or intercepted mid-transfer. The seizures not only crippled the network's financial path but also exposed how they used legitimate financial markets as a facade. The recovered arsenal from the 7 locations totaled 324 units, with many firearms having had their serial numbers removed to evade tracing. Some equipment was identified as smuggled goods, brought across the border using methods similar to the drug transport. These weapons not only served to protect the cargo but also acted as a deterrent against weak links in the chain, ensuring the system operated without leaks. However, the most crucial part of the report was not the physical evidence, but the list of names recorded in the internal documents. Those files contained hundreds of contacts, city officials, administrative staff, law enforcement officers, logistics contractors, and transport brokers. A total of 184 individuals were placed on the investigation list and prepared for prosecution, including members holding decision-making power in many key administrative areas. This was clear evidence that the cartel's operation was not solely based on transport and transactions, but on maintaining a network of authoritative facilitators. As arrest warrants were executed, the reaction from those involved varied greatly. Some agreed to testify immediately, providing information about how they received money, meeting schedules, and their role in each phase. Conversely, many maintained absolute silence or denied responsibility, claiming the money they received was for legitimate services. But when cross-referenced with financial records and stored data, the overlap was too clear for any justification to alter the nature of the matter. In many residential areas, information about the scale of the operation created mixed reactions. In areas already affected by drugs and street crime, residents were not even surprised. They described how unusual activities over the years had already indicated an invisible hand controlling the flow of transport. For them, the breaking of the case was simply a confirmation of long-held suspicions. Conversely, in suburban areas or where many officials were arrested, the reaction was shock. Many could not accept that figures once viewed as models of public service could be involved in organized crime on such a grand scale. On the side of government agencies, the mass arrests immediately created operational gaps. Many departments had to temporarily cease operations to organize internal investigations, disrupting processes that citizens relied on daily. Courts had to postpone hearings, transport agencies had to review previously granted permits, and city councils had to hold emergency meetings to appoint temporary personnel. This not only caused organizational upheaval but also raised major questions about the ability to maintain integrity when the system faced a breakdown from within. In this context, federal officials emphasized that the seizure of evidence and arrest of personnel was only one part of the mission. More important was the restoration of the entire legal and administrative structure that had been compromised. This required not only criminal prosecution but also rebuilding oversight procedures, establishing mechanisms for independent checks, and preventing the risk of re-infiltration by any special interest group. This incident exposed the system's vulnerability to the pressure of profit from organized crime. And that very lesson became the foundation for federal agencies to proceed with a deeper level of recovery. The overall results of Operation Crosscut showed that the scale of the crime was measured not only by the amount of seized cargo but also by the extent of compromise within public office. And this created an urgent requirement, a thorough remedy, not just for punishment, but to prevent the system from once again becoming a tool serving interests outside the law. When the entire structure of the case was now exposed, the focus shifted to the most crucial question: what was truly damaged in this incident? The seized numbers, drugs, money, weapons, financial assets all reflected the scale of the network's operation but did not represent the deepest nature of the case. What was damaged more severely than any amount of contraband was the trust in the system protecting order and justice. When an individual holding judicial power can transform himself into a cartel's central connection point, the damage spreads not only at the legal level but to the communities that rely on the system for stability. In multiple community forums held during the investigation, citizens constantly questioned the legal apparatus's ability to self-protect. They were not merely concerned about the presence of drugs in their neighborhoods, but worried that the agencies that should have been on the front lines could become instruments for clearing the way. Hale's appearance at the center of the connection diagram showed that organized crime had bypassed barriers thought to be impenetrable. The feeling of insecurity came not just from the drugs themselves, but from the fact that the system, the final line of defense for society, had been bent. Interviews conducted in various neighborhoods clearly expressed the extent of the damage. In some cities, residents said they had long suspected an invisible force behind the sudden surges in illicit substances, and now realized their suspicions were not paranoia. Conversely, many areas that believed they were well protected now faced a situation where they no longer knew who to trust. A judge arrested for coordinating a drug ring, multiple officials indicted, people responsible for checks and oversight being the ones who created the gaps. All of this made the damage transcend the scope of a criminal case. From the administrative systems side, agencies were forced to rapidly restructure to prevent a power vacuum. Departments with arrested personnel had to make temporary hires, while simultaneously implementing cross-monitoring mechanisms to prevent a repeat of lax control. Affected courts had to establish new procedures to ensure rulings were not influenced by extra-legal factors. This not only entailed a heavier workload but also forced agencies to confront the question of their integrity before the public. Yet, in the context of the system dealing with the aftermath, one thing gradually became clear. The investigation also showed the federal apparatus's capacity for self-correction in the face of infiltration. The swift launch of Operation Crosscut in a short time, the synchronized deployment across multiple states, and the massive seizure of evidence demonstrated that law enforcement still maintained a strong capacity to respond when necessary. Financial investigators tracing every transaction, digital forensics teams recovering every encrypted data sequence, interdiction teams sweeping every transshipment point, all reflected an apparatus still capable of confronting complex criminal structures. In many press conferences after the campaign, federal officials emphasized that the responsibility was not only to determine criminal behavior but also to restore the eroded trust. This required a prolonged process of recovery, increasing internal audits, re-establishing transparency mechanisms for administrative decisions, raising the level of oversight for sensitive departments frequently facing the risk of influence from illicit interests. Not only did the system have to self-examine, but the community also had to be involved in the oversight process through feedback channels, independent committees, and mechanisms for public disclosure of information. The case also had a broader impact on societal perception. Many analysts suggested that incidents like this force citizens to look directly at the reality that organized crime operates not just through violence and clandestine transport but by infiltrating and exploiting legal structures. When an individual with power like Hale can turn the court into part of a trafficking route, the boundary between legal and illegal becomes fragile. This very fragility creates an urgent need for increased oversight and transparency. However, the case also carried a positive message. Even if one part of the system is bent, other parts stand firm and bring the truth back to light. The tactical teams acting before dawn, the analysis specialists reviewing every line of data, the communities speaking out demanding transparency, all contributed to protecting the system from complete collapse. As long as the public continues to observe and refuses to accept silence, the opportunity for trust restoration still exists. Concluding the investigation phase, one thing was confirmed: the greatest damage was not in the drugs or the money, but in the breakdown of faith in those entrusted with safeguarding justice. And because of this, the system's responsibility does not stop at prosecuting the individuals involved but must ensure that such a breakdown is not repeated. The path to recovery may be long, but it starts with looking squarely at the truth and accepting that justice cannot exist unless the system is protected from the influence of forces outside the law.